Hello everyone. Today I'm going to start a new topic, that is social movements and social policy. This lecture is in the context of the wider syllabus pattern, that was elements of policy climate. So while discussing about the elements of policy climate, I had in my previous two lectures I had discussed about the political environment, the political culture, political in what manner the policies are created, implemented, and I had also spoken about the neoliberal policies, the critical analysis of those neoliberal policies. And today I'm going to talk about social movements and how social movements are important and how they have paved the way to in or they have helped in public policies as well as in social policies. So we are going to discuss about the social movements, a brief about the social movements, its definition, characteristics, nature, content, and then I will try to integrate or bring about a relationship between social how instrumental they are in influencing public as well as social policies. Now if we look into the term social policy, it was introduced in 1850 by the German sociologist Lawrence von Stein in his book History of the French Social Movement from 1789 to the present 1850. Social movements is carrying out, resisting, undoing a social change. Social movements are particularly, they are universal, and they had been found in all, their existence had been in all societies, whether talking about the past civilizations or past societies or in the current scenario. Their nature, scope and frequency of course vary depending upon what type of movements was initiated, in what era the movement was initiated, and in which context, in which society, in which country the movement had taken place. Starting from the peasants movements, migratory movements, tribal movements, Sufi movements, women, and more recently, racial movements, and there are many more students movements. So it could vary depending upon the nature, depending upon the context, depending upon the objective and ideology of the movement. So, in the early period of political formations, social movements shaped the state. In fact, the social movement, they had an historical connotation because. In, in the formation, in the formative years of creating a political structure or governance, social movements, they really shaped the functioning of a state, and they were instrumental in creating, in bringing about changes in the policy framework or within the socio-economic or conditions of a society, even looked into the welfare aspect of it. So its functions, responsibilities as well as accountability, and also its political boundary, all these were being created with the help of movements while running a government, or when you talk about governance. So they also played a very significant role in the distribution of power among various institutions, among various segments in the society. In the contemporary times, their occurrences are all in the states, are in all the states, and they often, though not always, play a very decisive role in all political system, whether it is democratic or authoritarian. Nevertheless, they definitely influence the course of action a government takes. They also make and unmake political institutions, norms of social and political behavior, and also nature of regimes. So social and political conflicts as well as expectations of the people get reflected in the movements. The political leaders and authors who had used the term were concerned with the emancipation of exploited classes and the creation of a new society by changing value system as well as institutions or property relationships. So in because of this, they were concerned with this emancipation. So that's why the movement came into existence and came into being as a resistant change. So in modern times, they also played a very significant role in challenging the feudal authority or church or foreign rule and authoritarian regimes, even in the colonial period. So French and Russian revolutions, Indian freedom movement, if I particularly talk about various other movements, peasants movement or women movement, they have profound impact on the social, economic, political structure of a nation or a state. Even the fascist movement in Germany, Islamic movement in Middle East, Hindutva movement in India, or Tamilian movement in Sri Lanka, they have not only influenced the political discourse, but they also, created a slur in the value system of the public, and the legacies influences us in a variety of ways. So understanding of social movement is important not only for those who are dissatisfied with the present social and economic and political order, but also those who are contented with the system, to understand the fragility of the political institutions and their future. The term social movements gained currency, as I mentioned earlier, that the first time it was used by the German, it was used by the German sociologist. And the term social movement, it gained prominence in the European literature and languages in the early 19th century. And this was a period of social upheaval. Church and authority, the absolute power of the monarchs were challenged. People were demanding democratic rights and ascertaining for freedom and equality. The political leaders and authors used the term who used the term social movement were concerned with the emancipation of the exploited class and the creation of a new society by changing property relationships. So their ideological orientation were reflected in the definition. Hence, there is no one definition of social movement. So I can say a social movement is a deliberate collective endeavor to promote a direction, and may by many means, not excluding violence, illegality, revolution or withdrawal into European community. The term often is used to indicate a set of activities which may be undertaken by one or many organizations to bring certain desirable changes in society, such as education movement launched by the education department. The phrase social movement is in vogue among political leaders and social activists to camouflage their some political activities sometimes. So scholars and social activities, they have different ideological positions and on different ideological positions on political system and expected on political system and expected social change. And even those who share the same meaning of social change often differ in their views on strategy and path to bring about these certain changes. But one thing is quite certain among all conceptualization of social movement, that is collective action. It is a collective action, it is a collectivity of individuals who's about to take a certain action. So it is about the mobilization of the people for any political action. However, collective action as such, is not synonymous of a social movement, but nevertheless, whenever there is a movement, there has to be a collection of individuals. So action of a mob, if I say action of a mob in streets is though a collective behavior, but it cannot be called a social movement. So for instance, when a mob at the railway station or any such stops a train for a misbehavior of railway staff, or anything where there is a where mob has where any such situation or any such incident where mob has come into being, with it would not be considered as a movement, because it is more temporary in nature, and it was a sudden, because of that sudden act, it came into force. So no riots between two ethnic groups or act of looting from shops or destruction of public property can be called so these are not the examples of social movements. These acts by themselves are not social movements. They may be a part of one, they may be a part one of the programs of the social movement, but it could not be. So we do not call these collective behavior as social movements, because they are often impulsive in nature and do not aim at bringing about any social, any fundamental social changes. They are just mere reaction to a particular situation at that given point of time. So, however, when they are engineered as a program of the larger agenda for social change, challenging or even perpetuating power of a particular group for status quo, then rioting may become a part of the social movement. So, social movements are thus clearly different from historical movements, tendencies or trends. It is important to understand that such tendencies and trends and the influence of the unconscious or irrational factors in human behavior may be of crucial importance in illuminating the problems of interpreting and explaining social movement. But then, nevertheless, a social movement must evince a minimal degree of organization, though this may range from a loose, informal, or a partial level of organization to a highly institutionalized and bureaucratized movement and the corporate group. So, a social movement has four basic elements. First, it is a collective behavior. A considerable number of people or persons, they must be involved in any activity for it is considered, then only it could be considered. But then I mentioned earlier just that all collective behavior would not be considered as a social movement. Then social movements extends beyond a single event or community. Only when local activities have spread across several communities and events, they do become movements. So social movements is just not confined to a particular event or a single event, but when it spreads throughout the larger population and it demands more radical, more fundamental changes, then they do become movements. Then social movements also involve systematic efforts. They are coordinated activities rather than random ones. As I mentioned, that any impulsive action or reaction would not be considered as a social movement. It is more organized. There is a concerted, systematic efforts of the people who come together for a cause, for a change to bring about. So their activities, are more coordinated, are more organized, and rather than any random actions. Social movements are definitely change oriented, and they have as the objective some form of change in the way people think, in what they believe, their behavior. Some movements, however, they have their objectives, the protection of existing values or norms which appear to be threatened or revivalist or of revivalist nature. So it is not necessary that all movements would resist certain change, or all movements would bring about desirable change. They would be resisting certain changes too, which might threaten the cultural aspect or the ethnic fabric, or the harmonious relations. So that could also be a form of revivalist in nature. There are certain definitions which has been given by eminent writers and scholars. Like Herbert Blumer had defined social movement as a collective enterprise to establish a new order of life. They have their inception in the condition of unrest and derive their motive power on one hand from the dissatisfaction with the current form of life, and on the other hand from wishes and hopes for a newer scheme or system of living. So it is quite evident from Herbert Blumer's definition that there is a kind of an unrest, there is a dissatisfaction amongst the population and with the current situation, and they want to change this current situation. There is hopes, there is an aspiration that a new beginning, a new chapter will begin, a new system would be evolved, and it would be taken care of. Then, according to Doug McAdam, social movements are organized efforts on one part of the excluded groups to promote or resist changes in the structure of society that involve recourse to non-institutional forms of political participation. Then it could be said that social movements are defined by the ability to move large number of people to action to achieve structural and normative transformation on a national or broad scale, engaging a diverse range of communities and approaches simultaneously. So, social movements unite people through multiple strategies, shared principles, and shared goals. Paul Wilkinson has also defined social movement as a deliberate endeavor, collective endeavor to promote change in any direction and by any means, not excluding violence, illegality, revolution, or withdrawal into a utopian community. So some movements are thus clearly different from historical movements in the sense that it is important to know that such tendencies and trends and the influence of the unconscious or the irrational factors in human behavior may be of crucial importance in illuminating the problems of interpreting and explaining social movement. And social movements, according to Sidney Tarot, it is collective challenges which is based on common purposes and social solidarities in sustained interaction with elite opponents and authorities. So, from these definitions, it is absolutely clear that there are three important part to it. First of all, it is a collective action. Whenever you come across a definition of social movement, it would indicate that it is a collective effort, is a collective action, and it tends to bring about certain social changes, and there is a common agenda, common purpose, common wishes, and common goal and objective. So strictly speaking, therefore, we can say that agitations and protest are not particularly social movements because they are more often than not do not aim at bringing about any social change. So we can say that any kind of agitations or protest may not be considered as a social movement because they do not aim at bringing about social change. They do not conceive that they are reaction to a particular situation, but at the same time, more often than not, social movement develops in the course of time, and it begins with protest or agitations which may not have conceived the notion of political change. So it can be said, but then at the very beginning it can be said that any agitation or any random agitation or protest cannot be considered movement. But yes, it can be said that the social movements, they do develop within the course of time with a strategic planning, but they can, they begins with certain, sometimes they begin with a certain protest and agitations which may not have conceived the notion of political change. So for instance, when the students of the engineering college in the Gujarat protested against the mess bill, it was a relatively spontaneous act, but then protest led to Nav Nirman Andolan in 1974 in Gujarat. So this is how sometimes, any minor or a small agitation or protest sometimes may begin with not making it as a movement, but later on that agitation and protest may during the course of time change its nature, and it could become, it could become a social movement. So a particular collective action may be only an agitation for some scholars and a movement for others, depending upon the level of analysis and the perspective. Like for example, the collective action of a section of society demanding the formation of linguistic states in the 50s were viewed as an agitation by some and as a movement by others. Similarly, rights are not social movements. They are more often than not part of any ongoing movements, right? The significance of social movements. Social movements are important and they played a very significant role in shaping the structure, the even sometimes the socio-political economic discourse of a nation. Many leaders and scholars and philosophers, they conceive that ideal political system and social, they have conceived the idea of ideal political system, social order, and they had plead for the necessity and sometimes inevitability of social movements, including a revolutionary movement to oppose the present political regime and the system, and to establish the system when they consider ideal and perfect, capable to resolve the problems of the society. Social movement is a form of an organized dissent, if we can say so, and these movements, they provide a possibility for articulation of grievances and problems. It is a more organized way of disagreeing with the larger government plan of actions or government schemes or government agenda. So there's an articulation in public grievances, or it could say that it is a redressal mechanism to voice their concerns, to voice their opinion. So they bring pressure on the state, keep check over the authority needed for healthy democracy. So social movement is in a way of people's segments collective politics to express their aspirations and priorities. So without understanding politics of the people, we cannot understand the complexities and dynamics of the political system. There are certain components, of social movement. Social movements have namely five major components: objective, ideology, program, leadership, and organizations. And they are independent, of course, but influencing each other. Social movement is related to social and political change. So it has an immediate and long-term objective. The immediate objective may be to resolve a particular issue or protest against the decision of the authority, but that collective action does not end there. It takes up the other issues and proceed to a long-term objective of changing authority, power relationships, dominance, and the political system. So for the long-term objective, the movement evolves strategies for action. It gives priorities to certain programs over others, and it also focuses on a particular direction, mobilizing certain groups. So the path of action is closely related to or get evolved with the notion of the desired social change, and it evolves a set of ideas, propositions, and values that enable to perceive in particular manner of social reality. So the set of ideas and ideals form ideology. So from the objective comes the part of ideology, and the ideology is not necessarily well knit nor always preconceived. Sometimes I mentioned earlier also that during the discourse, during the course of an agitation and protest, when it takes the form of a movement, ideology also becomes more evident, and there is a clarity in what the movement holds for. So the ideology is not necessarily well knit, but not always preconceived. Uh, in some cases, ideology directs the movement, and in other cases, ideology gets evolved and directs the movement later on. So leadership then again plays a very significant and important role in the articulation of ideology and evolving strategies for action, for programs. So social movements, it involves mobilization of people, who in course of the process identify with the objective of the movement, and they share values, and they begin to share perception of common understanding of the social reality. For their mobilization and to sustain their participation, that is the leaders, they evolve different programs. So this also requires some kind of organization, some kind of smooth functioning. So the organization may be loose or well formed with centralized or decentralized decision making system for launching any particular program. So neither of these components are a priori and static. They evolve. The nature, and they get evolved with the in the due course of time. The nature and function vary from movement to movement, and some movements, they are found in rudimentary form, whereas in others they are fairly well developed and well organized. So these components like leadership, organization, ideology, programming, and objectives, they do get changed with the course of during the course of the movement. And even the objective, it can pave the way from a very from it may start at a very different angle, it may give a very different direction, but nevertheless the broader objective of any movement is not lost, and that remains absolutely clear. There are certain characteristics of social movements. If I talk about the characteristics of social movements, of course, they expresses dissatisfaction of people. The members of the movement expect that something will be done about the matter. When there is an agitation or when there is a movement, there is an expectation associated with the movement that it intends to bring about certain changes, and some important decisions would be taken in regard to the matter for which the movement has been initiated. Social movements, they are highly organized, as I mentioned earlier. They are collective collection of there is a collective action, and they are more organized, more systematic. They required strategic planning, organizations, uh, and a certain agenda. The group of people, they come together who feel strongly about a matter. Not everyone may be associated with a movement, but it starts with a few people, or maybe a two individual, who have strongly condone a particular issue, or they strongly advocate for a particular issue, and they strongly feel about the matter which has to be taken for the larger interest of the population. So usually it starts with a very small group, and it may be expanded, it may spread across, depending upon the nature and the intensity of a particular movement. Propaganda, public attention is being drawn to matters. When we say that it starts with a small group, but as it gains momentum, there is propaganda is there with the movement. When public interest is being generated, the public takes note of the issues and concerns, and their attention is drawn towards such important issues and matters in manner, and thus it further extends, or it further expand the movement in various areas. It influences public opinion. Movements bring a lot of changes, even in the minds, even in the thought process, even in the thinking pattern of the public opinion. So it tremendously influences public ideologies, public opinion, or the thought process of a public, if the movement has some intense objective and they had been in continuity to bring about certain change. So there is a higher tendency that it would influence public opinion, and when the public is also associated, then it definitely brings about desirable changes. So of course, movements, the major objective of movement is to bring about potential changes. It has the potential, it has the intensity, it has the frequency, it has the power to influence the society and bring about the desirable changes which they intend to through that particular movement. It transforms the society. It changes the socio-economic fabric of the society. If I talk about economic movements, or if I talk about the Indian movement, Indian freedom movement, it through this movement, which was a non-violent act, and the movement had entirely, the Indian freedom movement entirely changed the Indian political system, which also led to the partition of the subcontinent, and it further it transformed the country, what it was at the post independence, and now in the current contemporary context, what India it is. So tracing back the historical, so it may completely transform, bringing about effective, impactful changes in the society. They have the potential strength, and it should not be over or underestimated. Any movement should not be overestimated or underestimated, because they have the potential hidden strength to bring about to better off the situations, or to create viable changes in the society. Example, there are certain movements for the democracy in which initiated transformation of the society. So we can if we talk about the characteristics, it can be said that a social movement is a more deliberate, intentional, and planned in accordance with the goals and targets to its aim to achieve, and there are efforts being made as per the strategy which is being adopted by the concerned social movement organizations. So it is again a collective endeavor, and not the result of an individual action or efforts. When the collective action is somewhat sustained, a distinct as distinct from a sporadic occurrence, it does definitely take the form of a movement. So this collective action, however, need not be formally organized, but should be able to create an interest and awakening which it does in a sufficiently large number of people. So hence it could be said that social movement essentially involves sustained collective mobilization through either formal or informal organizations, and it is directed towards change, as I said, relating to a specific aspect. Most of the movements, they have some ideological base, and it is the ideology that creates a base, it creates understanding for attracting people to join a particular movement in accordance with the specified targets, goals and objectives. So, and for, of course, for running its activities properly, the social movement has an organization. It cannot be as formal as the government or private organizations. It may be loosely connected, informal or partial organization, but without having any organizational base, it becomes difficult for the social movement to go ahead with its activities. So they have, social movements, in a way, they have active participation of its members or the people who are associated with that movement, and they have voluntarily joined the movement in order to protect their interest. So for achieving the purpose for the joining, it is a more active group, and people, they actively participate in the activities and the functioning and programs of the movements. Now, if I talk about why social movements comes into existence, relatively, there are three important reasons or factors which are associated why they come into rise. First of all, there's relative deprivation, structural strain, and revitalization. I will stop now, and I will continue this the rise of social movements in my next lecture. Thank you.